Good afternoon and welcome to the 24th India Economic Summit. It's really extraordinary if you think for how long we have been part of, I would say, the economic history of this country. And we have been part together with our partner, CII, and I would like to thank with my full heart to all those, and there are many past chairmen here in the room, to all of you, and particularly also to our member for this extraordinary demonstration of loyalty. I would like to thank also my colleagues. We have a great team now taking care of India, Borge Brende, Managing Director, and Robert Greenhill, as well as Sushant Rao, who has the direct responsibility for this summit. When I was coming in last night and driving on the new highway from the airport to the city, I felt in some way such a highway has a similarity with what happened to the economy in the world. We built a great highway called globalization, but we didn't establish the necessary regulations, the necessary road signs. So people who behaved maybe at the beginning very reasonably, finally some started to race, and at the end we had a crash by some people who did too much speeding. And finally, everybody pumped into the crash. And we had a massive crash. Fortunately, governments rushed out to rescue the people who were injured in the crash. And that's where we are now. We had a massive rescue action of governments. But the main job still has to be done. We have probably to examine each patient whom we got into the hospital in detail and to see how we can make him healthy again. We have to establish regulations. We have also to change the behavior. So what I want to say, this is not a normal crisis. This is the first transformational crisis of the globalized age. And of course, we are very happy that the G20 countries and governments took so fast and decisive action. And I welcome also the pledge of the G20 leaders yesterday to work together to achieve needed reforms in the global financial systems, to restore growth, and to conclude successfully the WTO discussions. So this is a systemic crisis which we have to confront, but it's not only a financial systemic crisis. This crisis is interwoven, what we easily forget, with some other crises which we face in the world. First, we have, in addition to the financial crisis, and maybe in some way also at its origin, we have a crisis in the sustainability of global imbalances. We should not forget that most or a large part of the savings of the developing world was used to finance mainly consumption in one of the industrialized developed countries. And in this respect, we should also be reminded that usually debts are made in order to invest into the future, to invest into infrastructure, to invest into education. But here, debts were mainly used to invest into consumption. And this imbalance has also to be solved. Then we have, of course, also a cyclical crisis. Without the financial crisis, we probably would have ebbed out in terms of our present, of the last years of strong economic growth. And connected to the cyclical crisis, we may have also a crisis in the product wave cycle. The last product wave based on information technology is ebbing out, and the new wave, which certainly will come and which will be related to energy-saving technologies, biotechnology, is not yet in full swing. And finally, we have a psychological crisis. I think that a lot in the present situation is due to fear also. When I talk to my friends in the business community, I hear doom and gloom. And then I have asked the question, how is your business going at the moment? And then very often I hear, we don't notice too much of the crisis until now. So what strategy should we follow? And this will be partly a subject of our discussion. I usually would recommend a three-dimensional strategy, which means in this crisis you have to focus, if you have a successful strategy, on your successful strategy. But at the same time, that's the second dimension, you have to see what new opportunities the crisis presents to you. And there are many opportunities probably also in this crisis. And finally, you should prepare for the worst. But you should not make the worst case strategy the basic strategy of your company. And that's, I think, what many are doing today, which of course creates another push down in the economy. One positive development is certainly what we have seen in terms of international cooperation. Some of you may remember that about 5-6 years ago, I used the floor here to propagate very much the G20 concept as a modern concept for global governance. It has come into action, and I think this is a very promising sign how we can resolve or how we should address our global challenges in the future, which means we have to reflect in our global governance structures much more the transfer of power, the diffusion of power which has happened in the world. I want to say some words about the role of the World Economic Forum in this, the shaping up of a new global cooperation system. And I may, for those of you who are more interested, I may draw your attention to an article, to an editorial which I published last week in Newsweek and which you may have found in your registration material. I see for the future governance system of the world 4 pillars. The first one, of course, is the governmental multilateral institutional pillar, which we need, which is important, where decisions have to be executed and where we need certain reforms, as outlined also yesterday by the G20. But in addition, we need what I call commons. We cannot decide about our future in short meetings, very formalized meetings. We need multi-stakeholder involvement. Chief Minister Modi spoke at luncheon about inclusive development. We have to include today also the other stakeholders of global society and particularly business. And in this respect, I'm particularly pleased to announce that at the next meeting, at the next annual meeting in Davos, we will make a strong contribution to all the issues which are now discussed by the G20. And we never had, by the way, so much interest for our annual meeting in Davos as we had for next year. The third pillar is that we need to depoliticize certain decision-making processes. You cannot solve all global issues on the basis of defending only national interests and afterwards making compromises. We need really global solutions. And in this respect, the World Economic Forum has established a very unique scheme. We defined 68 different global challenges and appointed for each of those challenges the 20 most knowledgeable, most relevant experts in the world. And those people met for the first time for a global agenda summit in Dubai just a week ago, and the results of those global agenda councils will be integrated into the activities of the World Economic Forum and will form a basis in the future for our annual meeting, but also for our regional summits. And the fourth dimension is based on the fact that the world is changing. The world becomes more empowered. We have a young generation. The medium age in the world is only 26 years. And in some way, we have to make use of the new paradigms. And the new paradigm is interconnectivity. It's virtual communication. So what we are doing at the moment together with partners, and I'm very pleased to say that Infosys, one of our Indian members, has been an initiating partner in this venture. We are creating a virtual interaction platform for the global leaders, which will help to create instantaneous interaction in the case of a major crisis in the world. Now, let me conclude, and there's a lot of discussion also now in the media and in the public that this crisis in some way shows the weakness or even the end of the capitalistic system. Of course, we should not forget it was the system itself of free markets, of liberalization, which enabled billions of people to enter, to be moved out of poverty. I feel what we really should do, we should look at the age of entrepreneurialism. We should avoid to be stuck in old definitions. I think the future will be the age, not of capitalism, but of entrepreneurialism. Now, if I look at entrepreneurialism, I have to say, in all my experience, one of the places you find the spirit most is among the Indian business community. And in this respect, I have great optimism as far as India is concerned, moving out of this crisis. And here we are with our theme. What should we do in order to move out of the present situation, negative situation? And I have great pleasure to moderate such a powerful panel. And I would like to introduce, he doesn't need introduction, Rahul Bajaj, who is the chairman of Bajaj Auto and of course also now a member of the parliament. And he is representing here the manufacturing industry. Then we have next Rajat, who is the managing director of the Asian Development Bank. He represents here international finance. Our co-chair, the chair of the Confederation of Indian Industry, Mr. Kamath, who represents the banking industry, the Indian banking industry, one of the most prominent banks, and as I told you, one of the banks not too affected, if I may say so, by what has happened. Congratulations. And finally, Mr. Raju, who is as we all know, is the founder and chairman of one of the most successful high-tech IT companies in India, Satyam Computer Services. So how do you see India's situation in confronting this crisis? And let's start with the manufacturing industry. Rahul, please.
Thank you, Klaus. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. There's no point in going into the history of what happened and how it happened, starting from September last year and Bear Stearns collapse in March this year. It was a question of greed, it's a question of crazy leverage, it was a question of completely complicated financial instruments which nobody could understand, and especially in certain sectors of the financial economy, Wall Street, relatively speaking, no regulation, at least in the United States. But your note here says that according to IMF, the global economic growth rate in 2009 will be 3%. Now, I noted that this was a forecast of IMF in October this year for 2009, 3%. And already on November 6th, that forecast is 2.2%, from 3 to 2.2% in just over a month. And all this is creating lack of consumer confidence. It's the one major issue all over the world, including India, in various sectors. That confidence is lacking, and so many things have to be done. Some are not easy. How to build up this confidence without the government and the government spokesman losing credibility. If the guy is losing his job, if the company cannot sell, he has to find ways to do it, as Mr. Modi said, create an opportunity out of this situation, but you cannot say it's not happening, because then you start losing your credibility. So perhaps the worst is yet to come, at least in the real economy, or what the US would call the main street, including manufacturing. I hope not, but nobody knows. Nobody knows, but I would think the financial sector may stabilize a little before the real economy or the main street stabilizes, which could take, I don't know, 12 to 18 months. What should be done? What should not be done? We in India would suffer, I think, in the coming months from exports, apart from lack of demand or reduced demand in India, but from export. If the world is going through a recession, it's going to have, unfortunately, some effect on us. Now, we are talking of, which sounds very good, and I think it is good, that instead of a very, very low or a negative growth rate in the US, that their calendar year third quarter was negative GDP growth rate. The fourth quarter is expected to be negative, 2 consecutive quarters, a recession. The same thing in the UK. Now, we will go down from 9% in the last 3 or 4 years, average of 8.99% GDP growth rate, to all the forecasts are between 7 to 8%. IMF, the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister, et cetera, 7 to 8%. My only feeling is, this is the 2008-2009 April-March forecast. I divide that year into 2. The 6 months which have gone by, actually 7, but the first half and the second half. And maybe, I hope not, but maybe the second half will be worse than the first half. It in fact appears more likely. So this 7% is for the year as a whole, and it may not take place during the second half. In passing, may I mention, I'm not very clear as yet. I don't know what has happened in G20 meeting yesterday and today, and we'll know it as the day passes and tonight. But the $700 billion in the US, of which first $350 billion Hank Paulson had the authority to utilize, he utilized not for toxic assets, we know, but for recapitalization of the banks. That $250 billion more or less has been spent, but the balance, he says, not for toxic assets, but I'll do this, and maybe a little bit of stimulus, helping the middle class and others, which is basically the President-elect's agenda, especially after he takes over in January 20. At the moment, just an example of the manufacturing sector. The auto industry in the US needs bad help. $25 billion already allotted, they need another $50 billion. Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, the President-elect, pushing for it. Republicans, President Bush and Hank Paulson not. There are 2 theories. One, they lose 3 million jobs. If the auto industry is in big trouble, help them, etc., etc. If they collapse, the economy will suffer much more. The government will have to have a real more bailout cost. The others are saying, no, you did it for Chrysler 15 years ago. Some deserve to die. Maybe it will be a more efficient industry if one of them goes out. So it's a matter of debate, also a little bit ideological debate, but I don't know what will happen to that, how that 700 billion will be spent, and the impact of that, how long it will take to come. Maybe we hear that 700 billion is not enough, and what the new administration will do, which may or may not be passed in the lame duck session, the Republicans if they don't want it, but what they will do from January 20 would be in addition to that $700 billion for a stimulus more to the people who are suffering. We hope G20 would come to an agreement on that. I'm told they have. I don't know what it means in implementation, that all of us, and especially the developed world, should not now go in for protectionism. We know that at times like this, voices are raised, and the beggar thy neighbor policy comes into effect. He did this. Well, whether he did it or not, we don't know, but he did this, that country did this. We have to save our industry. Of course we have to save our industry, but not by beggar thy neighbor policy. And I do believe, coming from an emerging market country, that the developed world, including for agriculture, has a much bigger responsibility to ensure the success of the WTO. They are around maybe by 31st December. In passing, President Bush mentioned it yesterday, and also to ensure that they don't turn protectionist. In India, credit to the customer, We'll forget about the corporates later. Corporates have already borrowed too much. They have to take care of that. If you have expansion programs, then you need money, but it's the customer of our products who is not getting money. It's too expensive for money, and banks are saying, I'm sure Mr. Kamath will talk about it, that in spite of CRR reduction, etc., repo rate reduction, some SLR, they don't have the money because the money has gone for various other reasons. It had to go away, dollar was sucked in, etc., etc. So in conclusion, I would say that regulation has to come globally, but not to hurt innovation, not to go away from a free market economy. But yes, even Europe had a different way of working than America. So Americans will have to bring in some regulation to ensure that the kind of excesses which took place do not take place anymore. No regulatory body probably for the global world, no sovereign nation is easily going to accept it today, maybe 10, 20 years down the line. We'll manage nationally our regulatory body, but common rules, just as common accounting rules are absolutely a must, similarly common governing standards, so the national regulator can manage that. And I can go on, but I think the last good factor, at least to oil importing countries like India, is the $147 billion a barrel to almost $55 billion a barrel. That is one redeeming feature in the whole scenario. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one question with a yes and no. I know already your answer. If you were American president, would you save General Motors? Yes or no?
No.
Okay.
I'm a manufacturer. I'm a manufacturer.
Mr. Dak.
Thank you very much, Klaus. First of all, let me begin by stating the obvious, that the world economic outlook has obviously worsened considerably. Everybody has been hit, whether or not the crisis is of their making. Developing Asia, which is Asia ex-Japan, has obviously been hit as well. And China and India are also going to show declines. But everything is relative, so let me give you a few numbers. For the world as a whole, as Mr. Bajaj mentioned, the IMF and ADB, World Bank, all of us have downgraded our forecast 2%, 2% plus. Developed world, which is the advanced economies, this year hopefully will still show a 1.4% growth, though the last 2 quarters have obviously been very poor, but will slip into a recession next year. So 2009, an annual growth of negative 0.3 to 0.5, negative. By contrast, developing Asia will show a healthy growth, lower than what we have seen in the past, but still a healthy growth. We are forecasting roughly about 7.5% for 2008 as a whole, down to slightly under 6 next year. Compared to the 2002 to 2007, when it was just under 8, it does mean developing Asia is going to slow down. Growth will be lower, but certainly healthy clip compared to the rest of the world. Specifically China and India. Our forecasts are that this year, 2008 calendar year, China will still show a growth of about 9.7%, which is lower than the 10.5% they had over the last 5 years, 2002 to 2007. And in 2009, it'll slip to under 9%, probably more like 8.4, somewhere to 8.4, 8.5. India, which had 2002 to 2007 average of about 8%, this year we see it around 7.8, very much within the range that Mr. Bajaj, you were mentioning. Next year, it'll depend on how the crisis unwinds. On a pessimistic side, perhaps, we are looking at it would still be over 6, but below 7. We're in that 6 to 7% range. So the bottom line message, very much echoing what Klaus said, things are bad, things are going to get worse, but hey, look, it's not time to sort of, have a wake. And this is what I think leads to my next point, which is that our assessment is, and I'm sure Varman will comment on this, that the Asian financial sector, not just India, but Asian financial sector is resilient. Following the 97 financial crisis, the situation has improved. The NPLs are low. Asia-wide average is just under 5%. The bank capitalization is good in Asia as a whole, and certainly in India. Varman, if I remember the numbers correctly, is roughly about 12%, which is well above the 9% regulatory requirement, well over 8% Basel. The external debt, short-term external debt as a ratio of external reserves in Asia is still very healthy, which means it's low. Bottom line, we do not expect a full-blown financial crisis in Asia. Things are bad. As Mr. Bajaj said, it would be silly to say there is no problem and pretend otherwise. But at the same time, I think we've got to keep our heads above water and say that we in ADB, based on all our work, do not expect a financial crisis just because of the fundamentals. My third point is really a puzzle in my mind. And the puzzle is addressed to my good friend, the banker. The economics of infrastructure projects all over, certainly in India, has not worsened in the last 6 months. The financial side has, but the economics hasn't. The demand is there. The demand is very pressing. And I find it's a paradox that 6 months back, bankers around the world could not lend enough and didn't ask any questions. And 6 months now, all that they do is ask questions and don't lend any money. So, Varman, my plea to you as a visionary leader is to unfreeze. Of course, look at the fundamentals. Of course, look at the due diligence. But we can overreact, and our feeling is that in the credit market, certainly in Asia, where the fundamentals are, as I said, certainly much better, it is probably important to take that into account. I should have remembered to mention that the Asian financial sector has not been exposed to the toxic assets of the subprime crisis. So that's certainly one very important factor in our favor. Having said all this, I think it's also very important for the policymakers in Asia to recognize that while you fight the fire today, you must look to tomorrow as well. You must look beyond the immediate. And you look at the crises of the past, and the important lesson from all of those has been that only those countries, only those economies which still kept their eyes on the fundamentals, on the long-term development, succeeded. So yes, take steps for the immediate crisis, and I must confess that I feel that many of the economies have taken appropriate steps, starting with the US and then Europe and parts of Asia. But many countries need to recognize that the long-term, medium to long-term issues are what's important and what we must look at, which will mean look at the infrastructure investments in India, which has always been a major constraint to growth. Look at the investments in health and education, because those are the ones which will make sure that the human capital is strong and growing, rather than panicking to the immediate crisis and forgetting the future. The immediate crisis has to be dealt with, but not at the cost of the medium to long-term future. I could not agree more with Mr. Bajaj when he made this point. So let me just echo this issue about protectionism. It is very tempting when the times are bad to pull down the hatch and closet yourself in. That's the worst thing that one can do. And I'm very pleased at the G20, there was a very strong statement in support of openness, in support of more trade rather than less. And I would go even further. I would say this is probably not a bad time at all for India to take the leadership in getting the Doha round started and kick-started. My last point is that while we certainly need to talk about the crisis, need to talk about what's happening in the real economy, let's not forget that there is a large segment of the population which had nothing to do with causing the crisis in the first place, which didn't benefit from the boom that happened in the first place, but are certainly victims of the burst. And I'm referring to the poor. I'm referring to the 600 million plus in Asia, which live on less than $1 a day. I'm referring to another 400 million, which are just barely above that $1 mark, which means you have got 1 billion people in Asia who are very vulnerable. And I think when we discuss all this, when the policymakers talk about all this, we've got to recognize that this is the group coming on the heels of the food price crisis earlier this year, coming on the heels of the fuel price crisis, and now hit with the financial crisis. There is a huge danger that this group might slip below the bare subsistence level. And therefore, let me, Klaus, end my comments with a plea that don't forget the other face of Asia, don't forget the other face of India, which is certainly not shining. It didn't shine before and certainly not shining now. Thank you.
It was an important message, and you addressed a question to Mr. Kamath. I think you have other things also to say, Mr. Kamath.
Yes, I will answer that. Thank you, Klaus. Let me start by saying that I agree with everything that Rajat has said. I think for a long time we have been of the same mind, and I am happy to see that after almost 12 years we can talk in the same language, the same numbers, and I don't want to even say agree with most of what he has said, but I agree with all he has said regarding Asia, regarding India. On the infrastructure front, I'll address that first before going to the larger issue of the financial sector here and maybe a little bit in the global context. What has happened is indeed there has been a loss of confidence. I guess that at this point in time that loss of confidence is understandable, but is still not, I would say, warranted to the extent that it has happened. It is like you've suddenly fallen off a cliff. My guess is that people will gauge what really has hit them, and it will take them a few weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, and then reassess, regroup, and that slowly confidence will build up. And this loss of confidence is true at industry end for a variety of reasons, and I will articulate that when we talk about the financial sector. And indeed in the minds of lenders when they look at investment opportunities. I think it is for that reason that we are seeing this challenge in our minds today. Regarding the sector itself, the financial sector itself, one thing that I want to put up front is that the Indian financial sector is much cleaner than what when we see and when we compare the global companies, global financial sector, when we benchmark the sector is much cleaner. For the reason that Rajat said, that capital adequacy levels are strong, non-performing asset levels are low, the economy has been doing well, and I think importantly, the regulatory structure has been tight in most areas. There is certainly scope for improvement in terms of certain areas, as is globally, in the context particularly of arbitraging. And I think that has been one of the major reasons for this global crisis. So the fundamentals which created the crisis did not exist in India, do not exist in India today. And with the lessons that we have learned, I do not think we will embrace those fundamentals where we will have a challenge in the financial sector in the coming years. When we look at the global context, because then I will come back to India and see what is going to probably be the opportunity now. When I look at the global context, removing all the smoke that is there, I think the fundamentals of the crisis really is arbitraging. Arbitraging between the way a bank is regulated, the way an investment bank was regulated, the multiple times leverage that you could have, and then the freedom to create instruments, freedom to move those instruments into what I'd call very thinly regulated entities or entities with no regulation at all, the ability of people to set up businesses, leverage them multiple times with no oversight at all, and so on and on. I can go on and probably write a nice thick book on this as to what was permitted to be done, and this really caused, I think, a crisis when you started dismantling one brick, and then the whole edifice started coming under stress. I think that precondition doesn't exist in India, but the impact of that precondition, though I agree with Rajat, as I said, we do not have a subprime exposure, we do not have a subprime crisis in India. The connect today is because you are connected to the outside world in terms of day-to-day commerce. Though, having said that, the impact that we have with what is about 15%, exports are around 15% of GDP, you should say that should not matter at all. But global funds invest into the Indian equity market. When there is nervousness in their own markets or in their own businesses, they will take that money out. That will have an impact on your exchange rate. I think these are all fundamentals that we now need to understand, that though you may not be fully open, the rupee may not be convertible, you have taken steps, significant steps, which almost make the rupee look convertible. If I may add to that, the rupee gets traded on the Singapore exchange, the rupee gets traded on the Dubai exchange, the rupee gets traded on some other bourses. You could have arbitragers there, trying to take position on the rupee. So you create another set of complications for yourself. So you are willy-nilly connected, but not as severely as probably some of the other Asian countries would be, and or the West is certainly in terms of its own linkages. So still insulated, but still having some shocks. I think the challenges that we are facing today are the consequence of fighting inflation. As inflation went into double digits, we created a very tight, I would say, policy context where we squeezed out liquidity. And that squeeze still was borne by industry because cash accruals were very strong. But in a situation where, Rahul Bhai explained, Indian industry is coming under pressure, people are cutting back production, some of them more, I would say significantly to a higher level than others, but people are cutting back the production. Cash accruals start coming under pressure. The capital market's under pressure, so fresh equity is under pressure. You're not sure about your own cash accruals. And then you have the challenge of banks, tight liquidity, not very sure whether they would lend, and where they're lending, as Rahul Bhai again said, not to probably the sectors that you would like to see money going into. One more factor, interest rates went up because of the tight money policy. So all this, I think, has combined to create a situation where I would say fear has overtaken business and to a level beyond what it should be. And I will give only one illustration of this. The fear psychosis has been so dramatic between August and now that I would say normal explanations do not hold. You cannot have a set of Indian businesses which were so buoyant in end July, early August, where I think one businessman asked this question of, say, 60 other businesses who were around the table. Either we are in a state of delusion because we can't see what is happening, or somebody is writing fiction about business being under pressure. So I guess that in 2 months to go from one end of the pendulum to the other, you needed something dramatic to happen. And I think that's what has happened. The global context has turned dramatically, and in the Indian context you have started seeing some pressures that creates a psychosis in your mind. My own assessment is, let's go back to fundamentals. The Indian financial system is sound, it is well capitalized, it has got the highest, I would say, rate of what I would call safety built in. Because if you look at the banking sector, till 1 month back, you had almost 34% of bank deposits being parked in government securities or cash with the regulator as a safety measure. No other system in the world does this. I repeat, no other system in the world does this. So I think that should give the confidence that this system is a secure system. Though now easing has started. I think what is required is further easing, and we are heartened by what the Prime Minister has gone on record to say, that we are in 24/7 readiness. And it is not just a statement that he has made, that has been acted on. It has been acted on at literally 2-day, 3-day intervals as the situation has changed to respond to that situation. And I am sure, I think, as they continue to respond, the one, I think, or two small things that need to be done. Yesterday again there was a package, it is going quite some way in terms of, I would say, alleviating pain in the system. A couple things that need to be done, probably, work consciously to get interest rates down by 200 to 300 basis points. I think that is one agenda which I am sure government will work on, and that can be done through probably easing a bit more of the liquidity that I talked about earlier. And given the fact that 2 days back inflation numbers came in at well below double digits, I think it would now give them confidence that in the next 3 months, 4 months, we are looking at inflation in the 4 to 5% range. And I think anecdotal evidence clearly is there, proxies are there, oil prices crashed by almost 2/3, other commodities by half. I think will give them the confidence to ease. I think I'll end by saying the Indian financial system is in good shape. Indian industry was in good shape, I believe continues to be in fairly good shape. There is a mood of pessimism, we lift it, and then the numbers that were talked about earlier should happen. Thank you.
And just to come back to the question, ICICI will untighten its credits?
Yes, Rahul bhai asked me that question. I think all of us will loosen our credits. I guess that bankers have been looking at an interest rate, for example, on a mortgage, if the interest rate is at 14%, I think you are building systemic risk. Similarly, whether it is a car or a motorcycle, if you are lending at rates which look very high, you are building up a systemic risk. I think as the situation now is, as I see interest rates coming down, I think lenders will start working in concert to make sure that credit is available to these sectors, because I am the first to concede, and that's how the industrial cycle, in the 2000, 2002, 2003 period got pushed and started growing at the rate we are growing, is the consumer, and we will have to get back to the consumer to get us back onto that growth path.
Raju, the IT industry is a very important part, of course, of India. How are you affected? How do you see the future?
I'd like to start off by stating that I had this inquiry made this morning as to what the attendance this year is at this India Economic Summit. And I was told that the demand this year was even greater than last year, and a number of applications had to be turned down. I thought that this is an excellent representation of the enthusiasm among the participants wanting to explore as to how to deal with the situation, being the mood rather than being fearful of what is being witnessed and withdraw. And I think that is an excellent sign, and I think it's a positive sign. Many of the points have been made, and as Mr. Schwab has said, maybe I will give impressions arising out of our involvement in the services sector. One of the realizations that has come to dawn upon me is that the world is more interconnected than what I have imagined till a few months ago. And this interconnectedness is not just about how the capital markets have behaved and as to how the stock markets have behaved globally and how they tracked each other, but also the fact that the implications of these appear to be even more on industries what one would expect to be less connected. For example, it is natural to expect that a services industry such as ours, which is highly global in nature, will naturally be impacted, and there will be implications. But the fact that the manufacturing industry, which is not necessarily into exports in many cases, is also affected, that it has implications across the fields, is quite revealing. And this brings us to the fact that in the last 15 years or so, from something like 36% global trade levels, we have crossed to 50% trade globally. The proportion of interdependence, economically speaking, has been quite dramatic. I'm reminded of what has happened in 2000, particularly in the industry that we are in. We have described that as the technology bubble burst period. And trying to relate with that, the current crisis, and I can't help but describe this as the credit bubble burst. And there is one big difference between the two, as I could understand. As far as the technology bubble burst period is concerned, the impact has been felt particularly by the IT sector, and it did not spread very much into other sectors because people who have not necessarily adopted technology could wait, and the hell did not necessarily break loose. But when it comes to the credit matters, while technology may have emerged in the last few decades, credit has been around ever since the businesses have been around. And the implications of that naturally appear to be far deeper. But there is one commonality between the two, in my opinion, and that is the manner in which a crisis is dealt with, whether it is relating to technology issues or even otherwise, I think are going to be common. As far as Satyam is concerned, we have learned that you could lay foundations for a better future, learning from the past, and that's what the IT industry has demonstrated. We had grown our revenues by 15 times in the last 80 years after the crisis has been witnessed. I believe that similar things will be possible around the current crisis also, if only we deal with it in an effective fashion. And in order to be able to do that, we have to recognize that competitiveness is going to be the key driver. Protectionism is going to be dangerous if it goes beyond a point. Governments, like parents, if children are not doing well, they may help them, they can come to their rescue. But if they come in the way of entrepreneurship, and if they become players rather than regulators, people, who are able to guide the process, then, it would be dangerous. Now, what I heard from someone like Mr. Obama, when you observed him speak, is that he's talking about competitiveness, and therefore, it's good news. And competitiveness is not just about labor markets, it is also about how you create value from an investor's perspective, as well as from the customer's perspective and the consumer's perspective. And so long as that is the case, one would very quickly realize that the dependence on being able to access global markets for developed countries is going to be even more. For example, recently I was reading in the Fortune 500 article that the growth rates for the Fortune 500 companies globally are far greater than domestically in their own countries. And this speaks for the need to engage to a greater degree. Coming from the background of an IT industry, I believe that the knowledge base that the world has come to establish, particularly in the last couple of decades, is enormous. I would refer to this as soft infrastructure. The soft infrastructure base is so large that this capital the world cannot afford to not take full advantage of. Because this capital is very different from other capital. This asset is very different from other assets. So when other assets get distributed, then they pass hands. Whereas these assets, when they are distributed, the people who had it earlier would have it to a greater degree. Now I am reminded of what MIT has done, and MIT has put all its course material on the net, and it is in the public domain. So a person in an Indian village can access it as much as the students of MIT can access it. You cannot transfer the buildings, even if you are given 10, 20 or 30 years to any of the developing countries. But this intellectual property can be used. India is a country of 1.2 billion people. If only we are able to take full advantage of the current human resource base, combining it with the knowledge that one can tap into, I think we would have answers to overcome some of the problems that we are faced with.
Thank you. Just to illustrate your last point, apparently the world knowledge base, which you refer to, the documented knowledge base at the moment is doubling every 4 years, which shows the tremendous dynamism which we have in this respect. And if I use this moment also, we had, I think, quite some optimism, cautious optimism. If I was thinking, Rajat, when you spoke about the 7%, it just went through my head. It means that we would come back in another 24 years, and so 7% would have been maintained. The Indian economy would have grown, would have multiplied by 5 in one generation. So even 7%, if it may sound disappointing, still represents a lot of economic dynamism, and it shows what future place India will occupy in the global economy. We have some time for a dialogue. Who would like to take the floor? Please be reminded, indicate who you are and what corporation you are representing and from where you are coming. Let's start here in the front, and afterwards let's go back. Microphones. Please ask always for a microphone, and I just will give the floor to the person who holds a microphone in his hands or her hands. But don't go into a fight.
I'm Ashish Jhunjhunwala. So while I agree that we cannot dispense with raw capitalism, which is really ruling the world, it has really helped the world to move out or rather elevate poverty. But then time has proved that China has been successful in their socialism also. So is it not time for us to revisit and have a kind of a common platform where we do not have raw capitalism, at the same time we do not have socialism, somewhere in between? That can be a solution to a lot of problems. Maybe Mr. Kamath can take that.
Okay, I'll very briefly put that in context. I think that's what, for example, our Prime Minister has been saying, using the phrase inclusive development, wherein you are clearly growing in a market economy, but at the same time you will need to make sure that the benefit of that growth reaches down to the mass. And if it doesn't reach down to the mass through normal market economy policies, then the government will have to intervene and make sure that that happens. I think this is what probably is going to be the route that most governments will follow.
I would add here, the motto of the World Economic Forum since its beginning has been entrepreneurship in the global public interest, which means it's entrepreneurship, free markets, individualism which drives economic and social progress, but it has always to be subject today to the global public interest.
Thomas Harris, Standard Chartered Bank. I was delighted that there was unanimity amongst the panel about the need to resist protectionist pressures during this crisis, and as the chairman said, one of the conclusions of the G20 meeting is to call for a conclusion of the Doha round in the next 3 months. One of the mechanisms in the WTO for preventing reversion to protectionism is an old-fashioned thing called binding of tariffs. That is an agreement that you hold your tariff levels and you won't increase them without paying compensation. So far in the Doha round, India has been reluctant to agree to bind its existing applied tariffs, not a reduced tariff, but just the tariffs as they are applied. Do you think in these new circumstances, and particularly given the comment about the need for India to give a lead, that the time has come for India to be prepared to bind its tariff levels?
I didn't fully get the question, but you see what happened in July when it broke down. There were 1 or 2 other reasons. Out of 20 points, Lamy told me when he last met me that 17 or 18 were cleared. They got caught in a couple of points. The main single thing which got complete media coverage was the US and India on special safeguard mechanism. Everybody knows that has to be there. That's the Doha development round situation. But at what stage should that be kicked off? What percentage of import coming in would allow you to increase your duty by how much? Now this is pure agriculture. This is nothing to do with the other things. That's minor. And on agriculture, we, with 600 million people living on agriculture, no government could dare take a chance, especially when the request comes from America, which highly, like Europe, subsidizes its agriculture, as I said earlier. So a subsidizing country is asking us to open our economy for even agricultural products, and we say our farmers, however inefficient they are, can compete with your farmers, but our treasury cannot compete with the US Treasury. So now who starts what first, I don't know. But the fact remains, our applied rates are much lower in every product than the bound rates. And we don't intend to increase those rates to the best of my knowledge, though I cannot speak for the government. And if we find people moving, the developed world especially, moving in the right direction, I'm sure our government, which is led by 3 of the most liberal-minded people in the world, not India, Manmohan Singh, Chidambaram, and Montek Singh Ahluwalia, the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission. In fact, sometimes we feel they are going overboard and not at all taking care of Indian industry. So I don't see where the problem is. I have heard this from various people all over the world, and I feel most of it is out of, I'm sorry to say, ignorance.
It's an important issue, and if I'm not mistaken, you didn't refer to the agricultural issue. So if you just would make your point again, I want to have this...
You're perfectly correct, Chairman. I'm not talking about the impasse on agriculture, where personally I have a great deal of sympathy with the Indian position on safeguards, but I'm not talking about agriculture. I'm talking about a concession which has been asked of India, which it has so far, as I understand it, not been prepared to offer up in the negotiations, and that is a willingness to bind its existing level of tariffs on manufactured goods. Yeah. That is an agreement that India will not revert to protectionist levels of tariffs. It's nothing to do with reducing protection. It is simply a binding mechanism in the WTO, where you agree that if you have to increase your tariffs, you would pay compensation. It is a very well-respected, well-understood mechanism in the GATT and the WTO for preventing reversion to protectionism. So far, as I understand it, India has not been prepared to come into line with other countries in agreeing to a freeze on manufactured goods tariffs.
It's a very important issue, and I would suggest that we take it up when we have...
But I don't think it's fully correct, Klaus. I don't think it's fully correct. Maybe we have to talk it with our government. US wants the Swiss formula. Everybody here may not know what the Swiss formula is. We won't go into details. And the question is what number, 8 or 34 or 30? And we are ready to reduce our rates much more than the US is required to do. The question is degree. That's where it's stuck. And also, either you have a whole agreement, everybody says so, or you have no agreement. That is what everybody's view is. So unless agriculture is solved, how does this get solved? I personally believe that on NAMA, that's non-agricultural market access, India will not be a bottleneck. I can't speak for every other country. If there is a satisfactory solution to the agriculture issue, because they say we'll reduce our subsidy on agriculture by so much, but you still have subsidized agriculture and wanting it to come into my country, even I can't allow that.
I will make sure that we take the agricultural issue and your question up, particularly when we have representatives of the government here who probably can answer in a more appropriate way. Who has a microphone? Please take the floor. Yes? Microphone. Please grasp the microphone. Don't be shy.
This is Anshuman from The Week magazine, New Delhi. I mean, I won't get a better chance to ask a question like this when all the representatives of different sectors are present on the board. I mean, if you think about the Indian industry, some time ago, not long back, 4 or 5 years ago, there was a common voice among the industry people, not even India, throughout the world, that government has no business to be in the business. And now, suddenly, when things started turning bad, all eyes are towards the government that, Mr. Ramalinga very effectively touched the point that government as parents, they shouldn't be act as players. They should act as parents, All the eyes have turned towards the government for help and all type of things. I'm saying that this concentration of money, as Mr. Ramalinga says, this concentration of money towards the government, liquidity towards the government, will lead, what answer will it lead to a different kind of situation, maybe after 5 years or 10 years, when government will act as a players completely, rather than the private players and all that, because when everything was all in you people's hand, situation has got so worse. What's your opinion about this?
Thank you for your question. I will take it as an opportunity to give to each of the panelists an occasion for a last statement. And I would rephrase it in the following way. What role do you see, I have for each of you 3 questions, and please very short answers. The first one is, what role do you foresee for governments now in the after-crisis world? Second, what is your wish in this respect to the Indian government? And number 3, what is your wish to the G20 government? In one sentence, please. Rahul, do you want to start?
I'll come to the international government, but for everybody, and definitely for India, the government should now follow a pro-growth policy. And for the time being, we are all concerned about inflation. Poor get hurt, fixed income people get hurt, industry gets hurt, but forget about it. We have talked of imported inflation in India for the last 6 months. Now what? $147 to $55. Where are you importing it from? If at all there will be inflation in India, it will be of fiscal irresponsibility. Various kinds of populist measures. I won't go into that. Pro-growth, further reduction of repo rate, further reduction of even reverse repo, CRR, SLR, reduce interest, make credit available. Mr. Kamath mentioned something about that, to the customer, especially to the customer rather than just the corporates. Without that, growth will not come up. Secondly, all over the world and in India, stimulus, fiscal stimulus is a must, especially for infrastructure projects where you are creating assets. It won't be inflationary. We in India need those assets, roads, power, ports, etc. Our problem is efficient implementation. We have tremendous inefficiency and corruption in the government. There needs to be public-private partnership, and at the present juncture, government money, our management. We have no money to give by and large. Those who can, fine. But their money, our management, accountability, because it's their money, fully accountable. So these 2 things, and I think the last thing I would say, apart from not being protectionist, for the Indian government, also to reduce, I don't like to any time ask for this, but the time has come to increase demand for the government to consider which products where they need to reduce indirect taxes. I'm not talking of direct tax, keep taxing us. But indirect taxes, in our case excise, has to be reduced on some products wherever the elasticity of demand is more than one, so that helps increase demand. The finance minister said 2 days ago, when there is low demand, industry should not reduce production, but should reduce prices. Well, Mr. Finance Minister, I say it in this public forum, help us reduce prices by reducing excise, because everybody reducing prices, you may not be able to increase your sales or increase production, and then you will have to reduce production. We are not going to produce for inventory.
That was a long sentence, Rahul. But I nevertheless, I had one question, one sentence. With all this large catalogue, do you foresee more interventionist policies of a government? Would you like to have more interventionist? Does the government directly intervene more into business in the future?
The U.S. should work towards a little more intervention, not wrong intervention. There's no time. I have one sentence only, Klaus, otherwise you shout at me. But the right intervention. India still needs to move towards more freedom. We have too much intervention already. So it's different countries. Yeah. U.S. moving towards, let's say, European type intervention. India also moving towards European type intervention. You live in a good continent, Klaus. So that is the answer, not to stifle innovation, as I said earlier, not to bring in controls, but yes, the good industrialists, the good entrepreneurs must be supported. Don't hold them back. But those who have misused their authority, who have leveraged 1 to 35, who have taken $150 million bonuses, and the companies are losing money, they need control. They need to be thrown out.
Even if bankers seem to have not anymore the last word in the world of the future, but so I will give you the last word, and I will ask Mr. Raju first to represent the other facet of industry.
Yeah. The question that has been posed, I'd like to separate it out into two parts. One is the rules of the game, the second being players in the given game. And I would think that we have to constantly learn from the outcomes of the games and as to whether they have been fair or not, so that you are able to tweak the rules and improve them on an ongoing basis. In that sense, there is a significant role for the ongoing role for the government to play, and in today's times, we have to do that to even a greater degree. It is also the case that sometimes the government has to participate, by way of providing resources or even being players. And I would think that it is resource support that is more important than being the players. And I would strongly support what Rahul has said, that there is a need today for greater public-private partnerships in the social sector, because the socialism in one sense has failed, not because the need has gone away, but because the delivery systems have failed. And businesses and corporations over a period of time servicing customers globally would have accumulated certain knowledge and methods, and if they can combine those with the government's responsibility and also resources, I think we can derive a great deal of value. And these principles apply equally to Indian situation or global situation also. And I think from a global perspective, governments coming together so that they are ensuring that there are common policies and where necessary, they are pooling resources is important.
Thank you, Rajat.
Role of government should be to govern, to provide good governance. Free market does not mean unregulated market, and I think the role of government is to have the regulations and then to regulate, but that does not mean the government gets into the economic production means. And there is also no reason to be apologetic for government needed to step in a counter-cyclical way. On the second one, wish to the Indian government, one sentence answer, I agree with Rahul Bhai. Wish to G20, I think the key message has to be be more inclusive. The center of gravity of the economic powers have shifted east. You have got to have India and China and Brazil at the table, and I'm very pleased they were in Washington. So my message to G20 essentially would be recognize the new economic order and work with it.
Now, the banker has still the last word.
I agree with everything that my colleagues on the panel have said. That's half the sentence. The other half is...
you have no other choice anymore than to agree. That's the new world.
The other half is that as far as India is concerned, I don't think Indian industry or any other sector of Indian business has actually asked for a bailout. I think all they've asked is for a facilitative environment. And as I hear it, the government has responded in saying, yes, we will work on a facilitative environment, and has continued to work on that environment. And I'm sure we will see the results in coming days. Thank you, Klaus.
Please join me in thanking the panelists for providing us with a framework for our discussions. Thank you.